Good afternoon, delegates. At this point, you can start sharing your screen. Once I tell you to begin, you can begin. Welcome to the JDC West 2022 Operations Management Case Presentation. I would like to thank our judges today. Today we have with us Gary Bell, Christina Redmond, and Lisa Elliott. Competitors will have a maximum of 20 minutes to present. Immediately following the presentation, judges will have a total of 5 minutes to ask the presenters questions. Competitors, you will see Zoom chat notifications at various intervals to indicate the remaining time. Any speaker who continues to speak after the maximum time limit will be stopped. No questions or comments will be permitted from the audience. All judges are asked to have their microphones muted during the presentation. The audience is banned from any material or naming convention that bears the name or symbol of a competing university. We ask that the audience leave the Zoom call immediately following the presentation. Judges, please stay on with me. Competitors, you may begin your presentation.
Now, I would like all of us to for a second think back to the 1990s. But in more particular, I want you to think about the go-to place where you could rent any video games and or home movie services. That's right, I'm talking about Blockbuster in particular. Back then, Blockbuster was extremely dominant. It was the go-to place for anyone because of the ease that it offered for you to rent any movie or video game that you wanted at the time. However, if we look at the present, they only have one location currently. Why is that? It's simply because they forgot to innovate, or maybe they chose not to innovate. They didn't look at innovation through the right lens. Now, as Steve Jobs once said, innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity, not a threat, which is exactly what we are here to do for you today. Hello, judges. My name is Igor, and today I'm joined by my teammate Joey, and we comprise YJ Consulting. We'd initially like to address the primary issue which we have outlined, which is where should the 49th parallel expand to? We have also outlined some secondary issues. The first one being, how can 49th parallel ensure that Richard Lafleur remains fulfilled with his work within the company? And how can 49th parallel ethically benefit from the temporary foreign workers program? Now, after looking at all of these three issues, we want to make sure that our implementation is built for long-term success. It embraces an innovative mindset and creates ethical work opportunities. And we will present you our implementation, which is called Liquid Gold, but we can get into that later. Initially, we'd like to start off with some analysis. The first analysis that we want to conduct is exactly what does Richard mean to the 49th parallel and vice versa. Now, the value that he brings to the 49th parallel is that he is in charge of greenhouse management and quality assurance. He's a key member of operation organizational structure. It's 20 years of experience, of industry experience, far more than any other employee at the 49th parallel. And he also maintains genetic quality of all plants and creates new strains through genetic mixing, which is how you stand out as a company. And he has an innovative and creative mindset. Now, what brings value to Richard is that he left the medical field cannabis segment due to lack of innovation. So he clearly prioritizes innovation within the cannabis industry. And his motivation stems from opportunity to innovate and work on new products and our projects. The critical insight that we see here is that Richard is motivated by the opportunity to work on new projects that allow him creative freedom to innovate within the cannabis industry. Now, in the case, it outlined that Richard was looking to start a new project on his own called CannaKick. After doing an industry analysis within the cannabis industry in Canada, we understood that laws around cannabis continually change due to the fact that the industry is very new. However, as the laws currently stand, Section 6.57 of the Government of Canada Guide on Composition Requirements for Cannabis Products states that edible cannabis, food or beverage, can contain a maximum of 30 milligrams of caffeine per container. With that being said, the Coffee Association of Canada states that a single shot of espresso contains roughly 16 milligrams of caffeine, and it ranges anywhere between 35 and 100 milligrams. So with that being said, unfortunately, while the idea is breakthrough, CannaKick at this time is simply not a viable option because it doesn't abide by the Canadian laws. However, another aspect that we want to look into this industry analysis is consumption. Now, as we see at the top of this graph presented, is that dried flower and or leaf is still the dominant wave of consumption. Now, as you can see, it has decreased over the last year. I would also like to take a look at cannabis vape pens and cannabis oil for oral use. Both of them have seen growth within the last year. And one really interesting fact that I'd like to point out is the fact that 68% of those who use vape pens or cartridges reported using oil extract, which is an 8% increase in the last year alone. And now 54% reported using flower/leaf, which is an 11% decrease. So we see a large change within the entire market towards using an oil. The critical insight that we get from this analysis is that while Rich's idea of CanaKick does not abide by federal laws, 49th Parallel should look to innovate production within this rapidly growing oil extract segment.
So one of the other big issues posed to us was, should we look at expanding into Winnipeg and expanding upon the current facility, or moving into Nova Scotia? Now, upon doing a 2-year financial analysis, we've highlighted a couple of things. Nova Scotia has a smaller acquisition cost to get the facility of around 4.4 million. Meanwhile, Winnipeg's is 5.4 million. And within 2 years, Nova Scotia is going to make 68.5% more profit at 4.2 million. Now, another thing to consider, however, is that the major benefit of the Winnipeg option is you have much lower operational costs. Nova Scotia costs much more on a per year basis to continue running after that acquisition difference. So Winnipeg's yearly operating costs are $374,000 per year less than Nova Scotia. That's a 431% yearly higher operating cost for Nova Scotia. So what we wanted to highlight from this analysis tool is that, Nova Scotia does have this initial higher profit, but it's also got vastly bigger operational costs. So when deciding which option to go with, we wanted to consider our criteria, which is building for long-term success, embracing an innovative mindset, and creating ethical work opportunities. Now, when we're doing a comparison between Nova Scotia and Winnipeg, we decided to look at it from a kind of a why not perspective. So why would you want to go with Nova Scotia? You do get those higher 2-year profits where you'd look at in total about 10.4 million. You get an option to have an East Coast distribution hub, but mainly it's cheaper to start up. And the big thing is you can produce in your Winnipeg plant while you're setting up your Nova Scotia plant. Why you wouldn't want to go with Nova Scotia is these higher recurring operating costs in increased salaries, increased utilities costs, and increased shipping costs. It's difficult to have centralized oversight of plant operations as you're separated into 2 very distinct operations far away across the country. And you get higher shipping costs to your key consumers in Calgary. You also have lower average yearly profit due to these higher operating costs, which is the inverse is the benefit to Winnipeg. You have this central distribution hub for wherever you want to send. You've got predictable shipping costs. You're in the middle of Canada. You have these lower operating costs in lack of increased salary, lower utilities from plant size and central shipping. You get easy plant oversight. And the big thing here is it's a much less risky change. You can keep your management that you trust, you keep your facilities, you keep everything in one area. It's much more easy to manage that change. Why you wouldn't want to do it is obviously you have the lower 2-year profit, but it's still not bad. It's still 6.2 million within the first 2 years. You do have those higher startup costs, and then you can't produce during construction. However, given all these, we want to look at a long-term analysis to kind of give us a bit of a reference point. So we do have those smaller acquisition costs and higher profit for the Nova Scotia facility of those 4.2 million. However, with those operating cost differences, we find that it would take 11.4 years to eventually overcome that opportunity cost difference. The big thing that we're thinking here is in a competitive industry, especially with this many new entrants coming into the cannabis industry, it makes sense to have lower increase your profit margins as much as you can. So we want to go with the Winnipeg facility and our implementation here, our recommendation to you of liquid gold. So our implementation here is a 3-pronged approach where we will solidify the expansion plan, we will innovate through oil, and we will create mutually beneficial foreign worker opportunities. So the first prong here is our production plan. What we want to do is expand into the Winnipeg plant vertically, adding another 28,000 square foot floor. And why do we want to do this? You get huge operational benefits and savings in plant oversight, kind of qualitatively, but also in those shipping and utilities costs. And it's a much smaller, more manageable change for the company. Now, the resources this is going to take is that initial 5.4 million plant in plant construction costs, and the criteria this will meet is building for long-term success, keeping those profit margins high. Now, just the basic process that we want to go over, we're sure you already know, but for creating a new facility here, initially, you're going to want to source your contractors. Once you've done that, compare them, select your desired contractors. You'll have to shut down your Winnipeg plant for construction to begin for about 6 months. You'll also need to recruit additional staff during this time to account for the increased production levels. You'll want to train the staff during the downtime, and then eventually at 6 months, you want to begin your production. So rough timeline to line all this up, immediately starting new construction around the 3-month period is when you'll want to start your recruitment process for the additional labor. At 5 months, you want to train your new employees so they've got about a month of training before the construction is completed and you're able to begin your production. Our KPI here is very simple. At that 6-month mark, we want a fully operational Winnipeg plant.
Now, the second prong is the one that we're most excited to talk to you about, and is innovate through oil. The big what here is to begin manufacture cannabis oil for the already established B2B market, because as we saw in our previous analysis, there's a growing lucrative market within Canada for cannabis oil. Now, the innovation behind this project will also likely entice Richard to spearhead this initiative rather than CannaKick, simply due to the legal restrictions behind CannaKick. The resources needed for this is 2.1 million in machinery and 900,000 in design and training. The criteria that we meet with this prong is embrace that innovative mindset. Now, when it comes to extraction of cannabis oil, there are two main methods that we see within the industry. The first one is ethanol extraction. It is one of the first and also currently the most common ways to extract cannabis oil. It's a safe, cost-effective process that poses little risk of toxicity. However, ethanol is not picky about what it pulls away from the plant material. And because of that, extractions lead to a lower quality product that tends to have a more bitter taste. With that being said, we're seeing a lot of big companies within Canada, such as Aurora and Afria, switch to the second method, which is CO2 extraction. Now, this is an extraction method that is rapidly becoming the industry standard because of the quality of product that it creates. It is environmentally friendly and efficient extraction process. It is also one of, if not the most safest form of extraction that creates the cleanest product. There's no recurring inputs like there is with ethanol. CO2 is on a closed loop cycle, and consumers are beginning to rapidly switch to CO2 extracted oils because of the flavor that brings. There's no bitterness to it. And as I previously mentioned, Aurora and Afria are currently using the CO2 extraction methods, with Afria building a $55 million plant simply for CO2 extraction.
So looking at what you would need for machinery and implementation, we would like you to purchase 8 10-liter CO2 extraction machines from Isolate Extraction Systems. It costs about $262K per machine. We also want you to partner with Eden Labs LLC as implementation partners. Now, what Eden Labs does is they will handle the design, build, install, startup, and training of your entire setup for about $900K. And the big thing here is you will need to be acquiring a standard processing license in order to start processing the oil. And Eden Labs is kind of the subject matter expert on how to get this and what the process is needed to pass the regulation. So we're using them to kind of expedite this process and making sure that we have the processes in place, they're up to snuff, they're industry standard, and we've got these experts guiding throughout the entire path. And then we want to divide the new production space and resources 50-50 on the new floor between flower and oil. We don't want to go a full floor of oil production quite yet. We still want to have a little bit of room to kind of refine and perfect our processes on a smaller scale. As well, we don't have existing customers within oil, so we want a smaller production batch to start with. Now, to get the standard processing license, it is a lengthy application and it is a very tedious application, and that's why we want Eden in there with their expertise to help guide us through. But the initial process is an application screening fee of $3,200, and that's just an in-depth process and facility inspection, making sure that we have the means and processes to actually safely produce the oil. There's also the security clearance fee of $1,654, and that's just ensuring that the actual facility has the adequate security, as it is kind of a high threat location for robberies and break-ins and stuff like that. However, with your current standard cultivation license, you should already pass most of these requirements. There's also an import-export fee, and then the big fee here is the annual regulatory fee of 2.3% of your cannabis revenue. So the total static fees for getting this standard processing license is about $5,500, and the 2.3% of cannabis revenue is something we'll go into a little bit later on how much that will cost. The big thing that we are excited for here is our 1-year oil sales projection. So there's a couple of assumptions here that we want to highlight before we go into it. Based off of Afria's findings, they find that it's about a 6 milliliter oil to 1 gram flour ratio for how much oil you can extract per gram. You're looking at a sales price right now. We went for a conservative estimate of 30. You could end up having it as high as 40, 45. And then we also assume that the same gram production costs occur for the amount of grams that we'd be using in oil production. But based off of these numbers and assumptions, we'd be selling 30 milliliter bottles at $30. We'd use half of the amount of flour in that new production space. We'd end up producing 560,000 units with material costs of about 10 million. The big thing here is these regulatory fees, 2.3%, are about $386K. But for only half of your new production facility, you're looking at $6.3 million in profit in 1 year. And that's fantastic. That's what we're really excited about with this. The timeline for setting up this oil production facility is immediately start with Eden Labs and getting the design and planning done with how you want to set up your extraction facility. That'll kind of happen during the construction process as well. And around 6 months, you're going to apply for your standard processing license once everything's set up in the facility and construction is completed. And then in about 1 year, you'll begin your oil production process. And the KPI here is we want 560,000 units produced within that first full year of production.
Now, the next thing that we'd like to get into is, of course, with expansion, you require new employees. So we want to create a mutually beneficial foreign worker opportunities. The big what here is to employ temporary foreign workers for the newly expanded portion of the 49th parallel. The why behind this is that you want to be able to set the gold standard for foreign workers within Canada. And we'll get into the big why behind that later. And you also want to save on future production labor costs. Now, let's talk about what exactly does a foreign employee. The drill down here is a current HR team, and then the criteria met is create ethical work opportunities. Now, let's get into the impact of temporary foreign employees because it is so much more than simply reduced operational costs. After doing some research, we found out that they provide a breadth of new experience, which enriches a company's decision-making process at all levels. They improve employee morale as job seekers gravitate towards companies with diverse workforces. And the University of Florida study shows that a more diverse workforce boosts productivity and offers a competitive advantage as flexibility and creativity are keys to competitiveness. But not only that, we want 49th Parallel to go a step further because foreign workers have a huge national impact. Due to this, there's currently more than half of Canadian small businesses that are facing labor shortages despite increased wages. Now we're seeing this mainly due to the pandemic. However, we want to make sure that the 49th Parallel kicks off a movement in which we begin to bring in these skillful and hardworking foreign employees to boost the Canadian economy overall. Now, how we would do this through our implementation is the following. We see in the statistic that a 27% increase in the first full year average income after immigration. Now, 90% of this increase is attributed to the rising share of immigrants who worked in Canada before. And this is where that temporary work program that we previously mentioned would come into play. You would look to provide foreign workers with a guaranteed 2-year contract, which is not something that's common, especially not in Manitoba. As we see on the graph on the right, there's only 1% of the employees are currently foreign workers, and we'd love to boost that. The big reason behind this is because foreign workers tend to experience things such as violated rights and threats of deportation. However, if we are looking to hire them, we want to make sure that they have those 2 years. And they will be working for us if they are willing to. Not only that, we also want to give them an option of a 5-year renewal period, because once a worker works for 2 years, they're able to apply for permanent residency status. And after that, it'll take them 5 years to become a Canadian citizen. And then they can become a contributing member of Canada and the national economy for the rest of their lives, or as long as they wish to. And we also want to make sure that we treat these employees just as any other employee within the company. We'd like to introduce a performance-based incentive of 7% to all employees so they can reap the benefits of the hard work, and also provide benefits to foreign workers if they re-sign for that 5-year contract that we previously mentioned. The timeline for this is at 3 months, you'd start recruiting, begin training at 5 months, and workers start on production at 6 months. And the KPI here, the really big KPI, is that 90% of temporary foreign workers are able to receive payment or permanent resident status, which means that we give them the opportunity and they are willing to take it.
So let's quickly run over the total 2-year cost for our implementation plan. The acquisition cost for the Winnipeg facility will be $5.4 million. Utilities, just under $100K. Shipment costs, just under $100K. Setting up that oil extraction equipment and training will be around $3 million. Manufacturing costs, so labor, overhead, materials, all of that, about $30 million. Our standard processing license application, $5,500. Our cannabis revenue, which is used to calculate the regulatory fees, which is the difference in what you sell your cannabis product for versus what you pay for the input materials, is about it's about $40 million. Regulatory fees of 2.3% of that are $917K. Total revenue within the first 2 years is going to be $50,400,000. And the total cost for this is just under $4 million for a total profit of $10.6 million or a 26.8% ROI. The timeline that we're going to be looking at for this implementation is immediately you'll start your plant renovations, you start your project with Eden Labs, and then you'll be recruiting these foreign workers at around the 6-month mark. You'll be done your plant renovations, you'll start your flower production on your new floors and your previous floors as well for the entire Winnipeg facility. You'll also be employing those foreign workers. And then at that 1-year mark, we get to end our project with Eden Labs and start producing oil and really making that nice money. Now, a couple risks here. If it's difficult to find similar consumers to purchase the oil in bulk, there's the option of potentially sourcing some sort of label packaging and selling these oils to house brands, selling it as a house brand to these smaller stores. Another risk is increased competition in the oil space. You can remain competitive and keep that $30 limit. If you want to go higher, you can go 40, but if it's competitive, you can just drop price. You've got room to do that.
Now, what we talked about here today is, again, our criteria for build for long-term success, embrace an innovative mindset, and create ethical work opportunities. This is all going to be done through the recommendation we've proposed to you, which is Liquid Gold, which has an impact of a 2-year ROI of 26.8%, ethical and diverse workforce. And this is all because we're willing to take that mindset of innovation as the ability to see it change as an opportunity, not a threat. Thank you. We open the floor for any questions.
Christina, you can go ahead. Christina, you're on mute.
The after lunch mute. Thank you, Joe and Jaeger, for your presentation and for all the work that you've put into it today. I did have a question about if you made a consideration on the risks and how you mitigated that due to the interruption in our supply chain to our customers during our construction phase, that 6-month downtime that we would experience.
Yeah, sure. So in regards to the downtime, we think that the best mitigation for that would simply be communication of the downtime that we'll be having in production. And the fact that most of the current product is going to one consumer, we could also give them the option of saying, hey, once we are back to full production, we can commit even more product to you and use it as a, temporary downtime for increased product in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa, you can go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your good work in this presentation. I am concerned about Richard, being that he's a key player for us and has a specialized skill set that we've really leveraged in the growth. And so we may be assuming that Richard is okay with the oil strategy, but if Richard has his heart set on beverages, I wonder what's the risk and what your perception of the labor market is like in the event we have to replace Richard.
Absolutely. That is a fantastic question. So, as seen in our presentation, the last thing you'd want to do is replace Richard. He is to some extent irreplaceable in this scenario. And so because of that, we believe that while he cannot pursue Kanakuk for the legal restrictions on it, we think that the oil market is A, lucrative, and B, a very innovative market, which Richard would love to take on.
In addition, looking at the beverage production process, the first step is actually that oil creation. So the only part of his project that he's really not getting to involve with is, beverage taste and branding. As far as the actual cannabis production and the THC production, he's totally doing the same production process that would be for Kanakuk.
Gary, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Hey guys, great presentation and love the creativity with your options that you presented us. With the Winnipeg expansion, does going in the direction of the oil extraction versus flower, does that change our cost of necessarily needing to retrofit that Winnipeg plant? Or do we not incur that retrofit cost because we're going with oil? That wasn't clear to me.
Yeah, I can handle this one. So the oil manufacturing would only be on the new floor. So your current floor is completely fine as is. It's just adding that second floor. Half of the space will be for the oil production, and it only takes 8 machines. So it's really not taking that much real estate. So you won't actually need to retrofit anything. It'll just be during that construction process, you're adding a space dedicated to the oil production.
Just a follow-on question, if I could. So I thought the whole logic of the second tier in Winnipeg was the vertical farming so that we could grow more plant. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it's as far as we understand it in the case, it's you're adding another floor to have more real estate to grow more plant. We're just dedicating part of that real estate now instead of directly to flower to oil production.
Okay, yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. That's clear. I was just, if we are doing that vertical integration and growing more plant, I was just curious why we didn't need the retrofit cost to add those extra verticals.
Yeah, we went for any sort of production costs we're assuming are in the initial quote that we're given a 5.4 million for completely getting that process back up to production standard.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that concludes our question and answer period for today. Delegates, thank you very much. Just a reminder, delegates and attendees, please exit the Zoom call. Judges, you'll stay on with me. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.